Welcome, everyone, to the sixth episode of the Global Guessing Weekly Podcast, the podcast on all things forecasting and geopolitics. My name is Clay Graubard, and I'm joined with my co-host, Andrew Eady. In this week's episode, we are pleased to be joined by Saar Wilf, a serial entrepreneur and the man behind the website Rootclaim. We've talked about Rootclaim before on this podcast, as well as on our website, using it in one of our more recent volumes of Metaculus Monday. We are very pleased to have Saar on our podcast. Saar, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For those of you who do not know, Saar is a serial entrepreneur and a company builder from Israel. He is an expert in startups, and he has seeded or chaired the board of numerous companies, including some of which were sold to blue chip names like Yahoo, Oracle, and PayPal. He has been featured in publications such as CTech, Vox, Haaretz, and Forbes, and is generally known for driving innovation across industries and geographies. He was kind enough to agree to sit down with us today to discuss his career and one of his exciting projects, Rootclaim. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. So Saar, we would appreciate hearing about sort of your run in terms of seeding and chairing companies. What were you doing before you entered the entrepreneurial space? I read that on top of being an investor and an entrepreneur, you're also a semi-pro poker player. So what was your focus then, and sort of what is your focus right now?
Before I was an entrepreneur, I was a child, so not much there. So I started my first company when I was 21.
Oh wow.
That was in the payment space. My second company was called Fraud Sciences. That was acquired by PayPal and became what is today PayPal Israel. It's a major part of PayPal's AI security operations today. Since then, I've been doing founding companies, investing in companies. I usually like deep technology, AI, sensors, computer vision, optics. So a lot of interesting companies. And I'm also devoting quite a lot of my time to projects that are not necessarily supposed to be profitable. Could be, but if they're not, that's fine. And that I think will have a significant positive impact on our world.
And what sort of companies are those? Or is that Rootclaim? Is that
And Woodlane
WikiWand? Is
is
that
a good example. Yeah, a lot of it is related. I'm doing a lot of work recently on promoting better treatments and better analysis for the pandemic. Conducting a clinical trial on a few substances that don't have any financial incentive behind them. So
is that sort of vitamin D is what you're talking about? I know that you've
one of them, yeah. There are a few substances. If you want, we can go into it, but it's a very interesting issue. There's like basically there's most of the substances around in our world that could be effective have no financial incentive to having them explored. And basically, as a society, we basically said 1 year ago, we're going to look in solution only in this small space of patented drugs that can be sold at the high price, or alternatively, vaccines that can be sold at mass amounts. But there are so many other solutions, and there's basically just no one is doing it. There's no incentive to do it.
have you done any sort of research, and I actually like to hear about some of the trials you're doing there. Have you done any research into fluvoxamine? It was featured in 60 Minutes recently.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
a super cheap antidepressant that they found was really good at
Mhm.
preventing severe disease in COVID-19. Is that this type
Yeah,
of...
so that's one of the substances that seem to be very promising. It's not in our trial. My trial is only focused on very on very safe substances that are not regulated at all. So basically, stuff that's classified as nutritional supplements. I know there are people doing research on sulfoxamine and many other substances. But yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
And sort of like what sort of brought you to want to focus on doing that type of research? I assume you don't have a sort of background in the
No.
pharmaceutical industry. Is it sort of just out of public well-being in a pandemic, trying to find sort of really cheap and safe solutions? Just sort of what was the driver behind that?
Yeah, so actually, I did make one investment in a pharmaceutical company. But other than that, yeah, that's not really my world. I mean, it's something I've been studying since I was a child, as on the side, but it's never did like serious work there. But the moment this pandemic became a major issue for everyone, then I started looking into how can I help? How can Rootclaim help? How can the assets we have, the capabilities we developed, can be helpful, even if there's no financial benefit there. So I'm hearing my dog is snoring. Do you hear that? Do you want me to wake him up?
I
I
mean,
don't hear anything.
You don't hear that,
only
okay?
if we can see him. Can you
You want to
get
see him?
a
Let's see
little
if we can
shot?
arrange that.
This will be a great clip.
Yeah.
Aw,
Aw,
oh, he's passed
adorable.
out.
Yeah, he looks so comfortable. That's awesome.
What's his
Thank you
name?
for that.
Leo.
Leo.
Yeah.
Adorable. That is the first pet on the Global Guesting Weekly podcast. That is the
Yeah,
first.
big milestone.
I'll have to go run up and get Hector upstairs.
So as we sort of highlighted here, I mean, your projects have spanned across a lot of industries, and just, for the viewer's own sort of edification, they span even more than this. You have Point Grab, which is in the workplace optimization and facility management space. Initiative Q is in the payment network space. Bzigo, is in the
Zigo.
Bzigo. How do you
Zigo.
pronounce it?
Zigo.
Bzigo is in the mosquito detection and location space. And as you mentioned, there are sort of common threads with optics and AI and machine learning. But how did all these different projects, get you to the forecasting space? Or what got you into the forecasting space to begin with? What's the story
Okay,
behind
so
Rootclaim?
yeah, so Rootclaim has its origins even, I think, before most of my other companies. It's something I've been researching for over 10 years. It's I guess it's a combination of my general interest in global problems, global challenges, and my interest in machine learning statistics, probability theory, these areas. So at some point, these two passions started to converge, and I thought there could be a lot of value in helping the world understand itself better through probability theory, through better mathematical modeling of complex issues.
And just for our viewers, would you mind just giving sort of a elevator pitch, sort of overview of what Rootclaim is and how it works? I think a lot of our viewers are familiar with, Metaculus and some of the other sort of crowdsourcing forecasting platforms, but Rootclaim is very unique in the way that it approaches, answering certain questions, and I think they'd definitely be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So we don't really look at it as forecasting, and and the crowdsourcing element is pretty negligible. It's more about a methodology in which you take a question, currently only a factual question. So it has to be something where you have evidence and there's a few hypotheses you want to examine, and the hypotheses need to be um, exclusive and distinct and small in number. So it could be either person A is the murderer, person B is the murderer, something very clear. And you want to see how the evidence supports each hypothesis and which is the most likely one, or basically what is the likelihood of each hypothesis. So this is the kind of problems that we're very good at. We don't do forecasting. We don't do anything that where the space is very wide, so you can have like thousands of possible answers. Anything that involves dynamic systems you need to predict. So only cases where there's like a distinct set of hypotheses and a list of evidence, and you want to tie them up and see how they affect each other. So that's the goal. So it could be famous murder cases. It could be cases in wars and political disputes. It can be so you have some medicine here. There could be an issue like what is the source of a virus. So anything that has a distinct hypothesis and be analyzed this way, that's what we take. Basically, the approach is to try to map all the evidence and their relationships into a probabilistic model. The probabilistic model itself is not too complicated. It is purely mathematical. There is no, it's a formula. There's no machine learning there. There's no training. There's no algorithms. I mean, it's not something that can be improved on. Okay, it's basically once you decide that these are the inputs, there's only one mathematical solution. So the question is basically, how do you map the world into the inputs of the formula in a way that is as accurate as possible? So that's most of the work, and there's a lot of methodology here on how you go through the hypotheses, how you find them, how you find the evidence, how you find the dependencies between evidence, how you find the probabilistic effect of the evidence on the hypothesis. So that is basically, it's a lot about the methodology that is able to be very unbiased, very accurate, very comprehensive, and get results that are much better than any human can do by themselves.
So I
And
think
just
sort of
quickly,
like just sort of to
sorry,
dig
go
in a
ahead.
little bit deeper on that. So you basically start off calculating like the base rate assumptions of the situation, and then you go by and list out each piece of evidence and how that piece of evidence affects the overall likelihood, and it has a sort of effect multiplier. The effect
Right.
multiplier to me seems like the most artistical or artistic aspect of the root claim
Mm-hmm.
process. And I was wondering if
Mm-hmm.
you could sort of dig a little bit deeper in terms of how you do that effect analysis and how you sort of determine the multipliers. Like if you guys are currently seeing the screen right now and watching the video of the podcast, this is Root Claim's analysis on what happened with the Malaysian Airlines flight 370. And if you see here, if you look at pilot and co-pilot behavior, there's an examination of their behavior, and it gives an effect analysis in terms of affecting the likelihood of all of the different hypotheses. And I was just wondering if you could just dig a little bit deeper into um, how that works.
Sure. So basically, the number we're trying to estimate is how likely, or what is the ratio of likelihoods of this evidence under the different hypotheses. So, for example, you have you want to analyze a case where you're trying to determine between a suicide and murder, and you have no gunpowder residue on the victim's, the deceased's hand. Okay, and you try to assess how that affects your current understanding of the situation. So you already have some likelihood. You estimate it based on the priors and the evidence so far of suicide and murder. And now there's a new evidence coming, and that is the lack of gunpowder residue. So ideally, what you would do, you would find databases that give the FBI is a good source for that in this specific case. That would give you the forensic statistics on how often a person will shoot a gun and not have residue. Then you get a number. I think in this case the number is 12% that it won't happen. And so basically, if the person committed suicide, almost always you will not find, unless the person trying to stage the suicide is made sure to take care of it. And if they committed suicide, you will mostly see it. And so that gives you a ratio. So it would happen maybe 90% in one hypothesis, and it would happen 12% in one hypothesis. So basically, that would shift the odds around 8 times in favor of the new hypothesis. You also need to take into account the possibility that the evidence is wrong. So maybe there is gunpowder residue, but someone faked it or someone misinterpreted results. So you also need to take into account that when you estimate the numbers. And you also need to take into account the fact that you yourself made a mistake. That's very important. In every stage, we also try to estimate, maybe we misunderstood something, maybe we used the wrong FBI database for this specific question, stuff like that. So that basically these are the three main questions you need to answer, and then you convert them into a number. So sometimes you can have good statistics, and you basically use that. And sometimes you will have to use more of a common sense, and that's definitely a weakness. You're relying on people, but that's the best we can do. There's sometimes there's just issues that are too complex to model quantitatively very accurately, and you need to get an estimate. The big advantage is that once you break down a complex question into many smaller questions, it is much easier to answer these smaller questions with common sense. It will require research, it will require discussions between people with different backgrounds to make sure it's the sense is indeed common. And after that, and after we publish, we of course collect feedback, and we often get corrections from the crowd on estimates, and then we will adjust. So basically, that's what you do. We also have another safeguard in which we will always try to use estimates that benefit the currently weaker hypothesis. So that would mean that that would prevent us from getting to very high probabilities for one hypothesis unless we have really, really strong evidence. So in general, you could say that all the numbers we have on our site today are usually underestimates. So when you see 80%, it's probably 95. So this is something that we still have today when we have a lot of safeguards, because we still, I would say we're still developing the model. We're still improving on it. So we like to leave more room for the possibility that we made a mistake. And over time, we will release those, and then you can expect to see more analysis reaching 95, 98%, numbers like that.
So that's actually a great point that you just brought up, is sort of the underestimating the confidence, because one of your the most recent analysis on Rootclaim is on, was there widespread fraud in the 2020 election? And sort of I went through and read through the entire analysis last night, and one thing that sort of struck out to me is the way in which you reached the starting point. And I think, now that you've just explained it as it is, you clearly are trying to reach the most um, the starting place that sort of gives the most likelihood to fraud.
Yes.
For instance, you even stay up here. There have been no cases of voter fraud in presidential elections, so let's look at smaller sort of state changes. And then I've even randomly clicked on some of these, and the sort of credibility or the magnitude of the voter fraud, even in these sort of linked cases, I don't think stacks up to the millions and millions of vote fraud scale you would need to sort of affect the 2020 election. And
Right.
so was this sort of constructed just to say, look, even if we take as generous as a base rate as possible, like, you still get these pretty clear-cut outcomes, and is that the goal behind it?
Uh, Nearly. So it's not about, hey, look how conservative we are and we still proven this hypothesis. It's more about, there's a lot of stuff that we may not know. There's a lot of stuff we may have misinterpreted. So let's try to be conservative on how much weight we give to each input. So, for example, looking at past fraud cases, voter fraud cases, there's a good case to be made that in U.S. presidential elections, there are huge international interests, and there are very strong entities that would like to affect it without being discovered, and they may have very strong. They have a lot of resources to execute a very covert operation. So you need to, there is a limit also to how you look when you try to build on local fraud cases. So yeah, so it's more about leaving room for the stuff that you don't know, the stuff you could have been missing.
But just as right, so one thing, right, you adjust for missing data by giving a 5x multiple to the fraud allegations. And then at the same time, you do concede that, we have these voter files and validated surveys, and even note sort of how accurate that these can be in terms of verifying accuracy. But this only decreases the fraud likelihoods by 0.9x. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how is that reached? It doesn't seem like the argument made in the missing data is as strong as the evidence of, the VSS, or sorry, the VVS surveys that you have in the United States. And
Right. So
it
first
seemed
of all, just
like
to go
when
ahead. Sorry.
yeah, it just seemed like that was sort of, you were giving more benefit to sort of increasing the fraud one, sort of decreasing the sort of pullback that the sort of validated surveys might have in terms of decreasing the fraud likelihood.
Yeah, that's basically it. Just to be clear, the analysis, the voter fraud analysis, is something I was less directly involved in. So probably, if you want to ask questions about that, I'll give you the analyst that was responsible for that. But basically, yeah, that's the idea. That's you want to give numbers that leave room for being mistaken on the low probability hypothesis. Okay, you need to be very confident when you start pushing stuff into the 1% likelihood and these numbers. You need to be because when you start getting to very low numbers, there's a lot of noise that starts to come in and not your signal. So, for example, when you compare DNA, so often it's been presented in court as this is a 1 in 10 billion match. But that refers only to a specific kind of mistake in which two people will accidentally have the same genes in these loci. So, but there's so many other mistakes, much more reasonable than 1 in billion, such as a lab mistake, or such as framing, or such as like an investigator, police investigator, intentionally trying to assist an investigation. So you need to be very careful when you start getting to the very small numbers. You need to start thinking of all the other noise sources you could be dealing with.
And then
So we
sort of
talked. Go ahead,
one more
Paul.
thing just on sort of like starting points, because I just find this, I think the sort of weakest part of root claim in some ways is the sort of starting analysis, is where I find the sort of most points for changing things. For instance, right, when we're talking about the US election, at the starting point noted no noted cases of major fraud in presidential elections affecting results. Let's look at the sort of smaller state and local races. And yet, if we were to look at the Syrian chemical attack forecast for Ghouta, um, you even say that the priors in terms of sarin and chemical attacks in Syria are not applicable as the base rate, which seems, in one sense, we're not counting, for the US, because there's no presidential cases, we're okay using sort of smaller state and local results to use as the base rate. But for Syria, instead of using the other attacks as involved in the base rate, we go into looking at motivations, and sort
Right.
of that. Perhaps you can
Mm-hmm.
explain
Yeah, sure.
better why that was done, but it seems
Okay.
sort of, you're doing it two
Yeah, I
different ways.
understand. So first of all, Syria, I can talk much more uh, in detail. That's something I know very well. So I think it's not about us ignoring smaller cases. It's about one, that a lot of the smaller cases have the same issue with them, which is each of these by themselves have the same conflict of the West claiming one side and the East claiming another side. And basically, I think there's a near consensus that all of the chemical attacks, or at least all the sarin attacks, have been done by the same side. Okay, so that's something that is generally acceptable and makes sense, both because there seems to be a chemical consistency between the attacks, and also because it's already a rare event. So for it to happen twice, could be, but probably less likely. Most people expect all the sarin attacks to be from the same side. So that's usually why we can't really use the other allegations as a prior for this, because one side says all of them are Syria, the other side says all of them are the oppositions. So hard to use them. Is that what you mean, or was there another thing?
Yeah. So basically, because all the Syrian chemical attacks basically would require the same level analysis, that like you can't, there is no actionable base rate. sort of the argument behind why instead of
There's no
using
base rate that you can take from the chemical attacks because none of them have been investigated in a level that is sufficient to draw a conclusion. So basically, we need to start somewhere. We chose the biggest one, and that's the one we will start with a clean slate. Later, when we examined another chemical attack, then we used the previous one as a guide for the prior of this one. Not a very strong one, but as a guide for the prior of the new one.
And then, so speaking about the Syrian chemical attack, Rootclaim on Twitter has been sort of very public for months that you will debate anyone for $100,000 all the way down to $10,000 to prove that, you know, your analysis, which says that no, that's the wrong one, that there is an 87% chance that the opposition forces, in particular this subsect of the opposition forces, carried out the chemical attack. 87%. You have been sort of publicly on Twitter saying, debate us, and if you beat this independent panel of judges say that you're right, we'll give you $100,000. No one's taken you up on that so far. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, in general, this is an interesting exercise we're doing. That is trying to show the superiority of probabilistic inference compared to human intuitive reasoning. And that is when we have very contentious results, we will offer a challenge, $100,000 challenge to anyone who think we're wrong. And in some of these cases, we are going against most authorities. Okay, the case of Syria, we are saying that all Western intelligence agencies are completely wrong. So and these are agencies that have superior information to us, but we are very confident that they got it wrong. So basically, we need, this. We're trying to show the superiority by introducing skin in the game. We're willing to say, okay, you think we're wrong, okay? So let's try to find a way to show the confidence, to compare the confidence of each side. Now, ideally, we would like to do it like the James Randi challenge, which was $1 million challenge for anyone who could reproduce supernatural phenomena in a lab, and that has a very clear test. The person should come to the lab and should cause, I don't know, the pencil to rise in the air without touching it. So that's clear. Everyone can determine if that happened or not. It's very hard to say to find a clear test to who did the chemical attacks. If there was, we would use it. We wouldn't need Rootclaim. So the best we could think of is getting a judge debate. You agree on professional, unbiased judges that both sides agree can examine the evidence fairly, and then go into a long 2-day debate event where each side presents the evidence and the reasoning. And while I definitely don't expect to win 100% of the cases where we are right, I do expect it to be biased at least 80-90%. And therefore, I expect that anyone who knows the evidence well would not dare to challenge us. And this is basically what happens, because on an issue like Syria, you would have millions of people very confident they know the answer, but their confidence is not based on actual knowledge of the data. It's based on them relying on the experts. But the expert, they actually know the evidence, and they know the evidence does not support their hypothesis. That's not to say they're lying. They do believe the hypothesis they're promoting, but when they are honest with themselves and they need to say, am I willing to put my money on this? They understand they're going to have a problem. They understand there are a lot of fishy evidence. There's a lot of contradicting evidence. They know they're going to have a problem in like lab setting, to call it so. So that's why we're so confident we can make this challenge, and no one will come. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So you talked about this briefly just now, but we've discussed a lot of the levers that can be pulled to ultimately affect the outcome of one of these questions. We talked about base rate, we talked about effect multipliers. One of the most interesting pieces of Rootclaim to me is sort of the evidence collection process, and just the evidence that's displayed for each question. On the website, you talk about how there's no cherry picking and that you're very objective in terms of the evidence that you collect and present to the people that use your website. I was wondering if you can talk through sort of the process that you all use to gather information, and how you sort of go through that selection process, because as we know, there's been a lot of fake news and new news sites popping up, and so how do you sort of control for some of the cherry picking or misinformation that might be disseminated on the internet?
Sure. So usually what you would have is, when you have like this a contentious subject you want to analyze, you will have a few main thinkers that would publish their analysis, and they would each cherry pick evidence, but they would each cherry pick a different subset of evidence that supports their case. And if you read all of them, you would quickly get a view of the entire evidence of the issue. Sometimes we would investigate. Well, not sometimes. Always we'll investigate further ourselves to see what could be relevant. Sometimes they could be pages, maybe a Wikipedia page or a news article that tries to assess evidence of both sides, and maybe you would find more of it. But getting all the evidence not cherry picked, that's pretty easy. You just need to want to do it. The problem with cherry picking is not too much about a difficulty. It's about a bias, about people not wanting to not wanting to assess evidence fairly. So we don't really care who comes out right. We don't have any stakes in the results here. So we can be fairly unbiased about it and open about it. And after we publish, anyone can point out if we're missing any evidence. So it definitely happens that we will publish and then add something we missed, and sometimes new evidence comes up. Sometimes the world gives you new evidence. There is something that is important to note, and that is that sometimes the evidence available to the public is by itself filtered or cherry-picked. So that could definitely be the case in a political issue or a security issue. So for Syria, definitely you would have Western intelligence agencies trying to filter the evidence and provide only the evidence that supports their country's interests, and the opposite for Russia in this case, or Syria in this case. So you need to take into account what kind of filters exist between you and the evidence, and be careful not to assume that after you collected everything there is not another filter that you're not aware of.
And then sort of like on that evidence front, like how, like for instance, going back to the Syrian analysis that you guys did, one of the pieces of evidence is video of the event, which is actually still linked here on YouTube. But if you were, right, it's not clearly the best quality of video, and if you go to the YouTube channel itself, you can get a certain sort of perspective on at least who the channel owner is on it,
Yeah.
which is not saying the evidence is wrong one way or another, but it's like you then gave that piece of evidence an 80% confidence. Is that due to like the quality of the video and the channel? Like how do you determine when you come across on a YouTube piece of evidence on a channel, listen up on YouTube, how do you then like input that into a forecast? I mean, into an analysis. I think what you do is really forecasting the past truth. So I think we'll mix up forecast and analysis. But sort of, how do you sort of determine when you stumble across that video that what confidence that deserves in the analysis?
Okay, so first, specifically on this case, the channel that published this video is not related to the event. They just, what they did is just basically enhance it. So it's just a this person with the video editing skills that enhanced this very black rainy video. The original video was published on LiveLeak from an anonymous account that claimed it was found on the body of a dead jihadist. So in this case, that's the source we need to relate to. Of course, this anonymous account. and basically, yeah, we need to say, okay, so this is not coming from a source we can verify. We need to take into account what else, how else could this video come about, and this is basically what you do in the analysis. That's the main point. In this case, it's very easy. If this video is authentic, then that's it. That's the smoking gun. You don't need anything else. In general, I like this. I like this case because always when you debate people about these kind of contentious issues, they always say, you're so overconfident that even if I show you a video of the other position, you will deny it." And this is a clear case when you actually have a video of jihadists, the Syrian opposition people, launching chemical rockets on the night of the event, and it's like just no one cares about it. They just simply dismiss it as staged, without even investing the time into thinking how likely it is to stage such a thing and how hard it would be. But that's a tangent. So yeah, so basically in this case, yeah, that's the question. You need to assess what is the probability of someone, probably the Syrian government, staging this video in order to divert international pressure.
A quick
I mean,
digression.
these are questions that you can look at. You basically look at the history of the stage videos, how often it happens, how it looks, and there's some. I mean, in this case, we show there's some. In the few stage videos that actually happen, staging videos is generally a very rare thing. Usually, what happens is you would take a video, an authentic video from one setting, and claim it's in another setting. That's the usual misinterpretation of videos you would see. Staging, getting actors and ammunition and everything is very rare. So we show in the rare cases when you do have a staging video, there's two things that usually happen. One, it is very clear what you want to show. If you want to show that, we show one video in which they're trying to show a Syrian government sniper executing a child. They staged this video. This was admitted. This is not contented. This was admitted as staged. So it is very clear that you see the child being very innocent and being shot by a sniper with no cause, and a very clear, in an open place. There's no reason for a mistake. So, and it's very clear in the image. So when you try to stage something for political purposes, you make sure it's clear. And the other thing is you always miss something, because videos are very hard. There's like each image is millions of pixels, and you have thousands of frames, and you need all of them to have nothing that some wise alley somewhere can look at that and say, uh-oh, that doesn't make any sense. So these are two things that happen in stage videos and did not happen in this. First of all, it's very hard to understand what's going on in this video. It's grainy, it's low quality. It's not really clear what they're talking about. It requires a lot of analysis to realize what it is. And the second thing is that like there's no mess ups. It's like everything is, there's no mistakes.
And so sort of we have just two more things, and then we'll move on from Syria because we want to talk about other things about Rootclaim and your background. Which one of them has to do with a tweet that Rootclaim has put out recently. But before we get to that, I'm wondering how sort of like community feedback gets involved in terms of this forecast. For instance, currently in the comment section on Rootclaim, on this forecast, there's a post that links to Bellingcat.com, which does open source analysis of the Syrian conflict, which shows with open source analysis of Syrian government movements how it's possible that the Syrian government was in the territory where the missiles were launched from. And I was wondering, sort of, did Rootclaim analyze the Bellingcat resource? Because I know that one of the sort of blogs that your analysis also relied on also sort of referenced Bellingcat before, so there's clearly some sort of credibility with that source's intelligence, and if so, how that was factored into the analysis that Rootclaim did.
Right. So basically, the analysis from Bellingcat is already in our analysis under launch location. So I mean, what if you want to go into details? But basically, what they did there is they try to show that it is possible if you take the rockets to their extreme end of estimated range, which is probably wrong, which is probably too generous, and at a certain angle that's probably not the correct angle, is not supported by the evidence, then you could find a way for government forces to get to such a point. It also, and okay, that's possible. If it wasn't possible, then it would probably be at 100%. And also, it doesn't take into account that possibility is not everything. You need to explain why would they go to the edge of the territory to launch it, and not just launch it from the safety of one of their own bases. I mean, it's not enough to just say this piece of evidence does not 100% prove we are wrong. You need to say why is it likely, and what is the ratio of likelihoods between the different hypotheses. In general, Bellingcat is they do a lot of very good investigations of collecting data, but at the end, when they need to integrate data into an analysis and a conclusion, they just use the same intuitive reasoning that everyone else does, and their conclusions are no better than anyone else after you read the high quality information they collected.
So I was wondering, how do you balance sort of the actual Rootclaim platform and the work that Rootclaim does with sort of the educational component of Rootclaim? So you talk about on your website, whether it's forecasting or sort of retrospective analysis, the same sort of mental pitfalls that people can fall into when they're thinking about some of these questions and analyzing evidence. And, you talk about cherry picking evidence or, testing your own gut intuition. Do you feel like it's important to sort of progress the analytical forecasting space and help people get better at doing this sort of work so that, ideally the outcomes of some of these questions get better? Or is that sort of just a byproduct of the work that you're doing at Rootclaim?
Yeah, so at this point, I don't think our influence is significant enough to be able to take such a position of educating the world. One of the main problems we have is that when you care only about the accuracy of your results, you are not you're not exciting. So basically, any person who comes to our website is going to be very annoyed at something. Something is going to be against their current beliefs, and the natural response to that, the very human response to that, is this is just low quality. This is some conspiracy website. It's no different than 1,000 other websites that give you sensational outcomes that go against mainstream conclusions. So basically, we are always in a situation where no one really wants to promote us, because if you go and you promote our analysis on, suppose you're Russian TV, you want to promote our analysis on Ghouta, on the chemical attacks, you're sending people to a website that says that pro-Russian forces downed a Malaysian plane over Ukraine, right? And if you're like an extreme right-wing American that wants to send it to our website to show that the Chinese are behind the pandemic, that the virus is a result of a lab leak and not the zoonotic origin, then you're also sending people to a place that shows that there was no fraud in the 2020 election. So we are not. No one loves us, and basically our game is just to accumulate as much success as possible until it's just very hard to ignore us. At that point, we can, when someone pays attention to us, we can start thinking about educating.
But doesn't that in some ways work towards Rootclaim's publicity? The fact that at least the majority of the new analysis tends to be on sort of hot topics that goes against the grain, right? In some ways, yes, if I'm a right winger, I'll share around the lab leak thing. But now that the recent 2020 election analysis comes on, I'm a little bit pissed because that goes against my sort of beliefs. But doesn't that also then in some way then help the sort of sharing process, right? By having those sort of conflicting views. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's sort of a counter argument to be made that um,
So definitely people who understand that the truth does not respect political boundaries and can hop all over the place, and thinking that truth is always somewhere in the middle, that's nonsense. Truth can go to very extremes and very unpredictable directions. People who realize that, who are definitely the minority of people, they could appreciate that, but they need to somehow hear about us, and to hear about us, they need some mainstream outlet to promote us, and that outlet would be annoyed by something on our website. But I mean, I think this will eventually work out. It just we just need to realize this is a marathon. You need to be very consistent, very not give up on these values of how you analyze and how you bring accurate results, and I believe this will eventually win.
and sort of I think we want to end on this sort of the Syria news that you guys have been sort of hinting about on
Mhm.
Twitter. Right? You guys tweeted big news coming, that you guys have done this research that will show one way or another with a high degree of certainty who was behind it with this sort of little clickbaity tweet at the end. But before we get there, we want to talk about a few things about sort of Rootclaim as a platform and sort of what's next coming for it. And I think one thing that we've noticed while using Rootclaim that I think we would have appreciated as people that use the website is if there was some sort of adjustable
Mm,
model, right? So instead of us, like we back engineered for one of our forecasts, the origins of COVID-19, sort of changed
yeah,
some of the
I read
effect
that.
multipliers. But I
Mhm.
was wondering if there's any sort of intention for Rootclaim to sort of build that in natively and have people be allowed to mess around with the analysis themselves and create their own analyses using the Rootclaim method.
Yeah, it is on the roadmap. It is a common ask. Yeah.
And is there any plan to show sort of the historical um, probabilities? Because I've noticed,
Mm.
sometimes they change, but there's not, or at least maybe I missed it, but there's nowhere to sort of track how it's changed over time.
Yeah, that's also good feedback. Yeah, something we should add. At this point, I mean, you can always go to archive.org and see the history if you want, but yeah, we should add something that's more accessible. But yeah, I read your adjustments, the adjustments you did for your own analysis, and I mean that you need to be careful there, because what you do there is you take numbers that are already have been adjusted downwards and you adjust them further. So you need to take into account that once you do that, you need to go back and adjust the generous estimates we made, and make them less generous, less conservative as appropriate. So I think you went way too conservative there. So
So yeah, well, let's talk. So I don't think that we. So the way in which we did that is we sort of looked at countervailing evidence and only changed our confidence and used your sort of limitations on the effect multiplier based on how confident you were in a piece of evidence. And so I think the biggest ones were on the fern cleavage in on SARS-CoV-19 as well as the chimeric nature of it. And sort of one of the big piece of evidence that swayed us in that way was sort of recent news out of China that they were able to find a wild type coronavirus that was a 94.5% match to SARS-CoV-2, which is one of the key evidences that is used in Rootclaim is the rat G13 being 96% accurate. And so,
right.
we lowered from a 90% confidence to I think an 80 and a 75% confidence. And that's what drove down our multiplier. And I'd be curious to see sort of why that news, there's been a little bit more recent news out of the WHO in terms of possible origins and sort of why you feel that we were too liberal with our reduction in confidence.
Right. Okay, so we can take it two directions. We can start discussing the genetics and the virology of it. So definitely for each evidence you just mentioned, and I think the first one is already in analysis, but maybe I'm wrong. There's also been a lot of discoveries that since we published that further support the lab leak hypothesis. So when you add new stuff, you need to make sure you add new stuff for both sides. That's one thing. Specifically on the furin cleavage side, it's not really about it being, I don't know if that's what you meant. It's not about it being absent in similar viruses, because it is important, but that's not the important thing. The main important thing is that it is an inserted site. So it is clearly, very cleanly added to the code rather than mutated more naturally. And also the specific nucleotide code they chose for the furin site is very rare in nature. So it's something that would make sense for a lab to do in order to be able to identify their viruses in the lab.
Yeah, no. So we even like read that the 2007 paper, we stumbled upon it before we read the Rootclaim analysis where they inserted a very similar furin site as well. Our point on the furin cleavage was going more towards in the analysis that you guys give, you sort of state how important this is towards a lot of the aspects of COVID-19. And there's just been some recent research in Nature magazine that was published that sort of both highlights, the aspects that make the furin cleavage important towards infectiousness and the deadliness of the disease, but also some sort of countervailing evidence that is now starting to come out when it's being studied in human cells, and sort of perhaps we were too conservative. And I think the point that you just brought up, while we added some new evidence but not all new evidence, I think is a really great point. But the big point I was making with the wild type 94.5 versus the rat G13 96% was at the chimeric nature, right? It's stressed that there's this 96% similarity, and we just figured that now we have this new analysis where there's this large sample of COVID-19 of coronavirus collections in a really small area, and one of those has a 94.5% match, therefore reducing our confidence in that 96% from rat G13 being as important to the overall
Yeah,
effect
okay. So no,
analysis.
I think you misunderstood it. So the issue is less about the similarity, because the claim is not specifically that rat G13 is the backbone. It's more about the one institute virology having access to the closest virus there is today. But more important than that is that the similarity is not consistent. So there, in the critical area, the critical that binds to the human cells, the ACE2 receptor, in that specific area, the virus is not similar at all to the bad viruses. It's similar to another virus, probably. I mean, it's related to pangolin, but probably not from pangolins originally. So the weird thing is that it is specifically the critical area of the code that is being replaced by a code from another animal that is that has a higher affinity to human cells. So these are all practices that are known to happen in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They make sense. That's what they do. They try to study how new viruses could develop, and it could happen in nature, but the fact that it happens in the way that they already research is the coincidence that needs to be discounted. One thing I do agree with what you did is that you discounted for the goal. So the goal they gave is indeed very weakly correlated to the actual result. There are many ways in which you can get a false result while being correct on the. So you could still fail the goal, fail the challenge, and the lab leak still be true. So that's always a very hard thing to do when you build such challenges.
But then, okay, I just don't. Right, we didn't decrease our confidence all that much in comparison to yours. And I would just like to dropping from 90 to 80% confidence, right? Just following your metric has to then therefore lead from a 10x to a 5x reduction, for instance. And just, when we were on Rootclaim, there was no mention of the sort of other, more recent evidence that was coming up for it, which I think is just the nature of the website. Anyway, this is something that we can continue offline. We're going to probably get down to a rabbit hole talking about the mRNA aspects of all this. So let's move on to Syria and this sort of tease that has been brought out on Twitter that will show with high certainty one way or another the Rootclaim analysis. Saar, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah. So I think by the time this is published, we will already have published it. But if not, then this will be the first place. That's fine. So past few weeks, there've been a lot of activity by a few individual investigators online. Some of it is already public, that anyone can look at it. Trying to look at the main evidence of the case. Mostly, there's the impact sites, and what kind of how they were hit and at what angle. So trying to indicate from that what is the likely source. And they did a great work of extracting a lot of new details from 7 sites and actually showing how they coincide in a very small area within opposition territory. And another thing is deeper analysis of these launch videos we talked about, which are so far were claimed to be forged. And what they did, so these are very low quality videos. So they actually went there frame by frame and built it, looked at every minor detail you could take from it, and found multiple objects, the structure of the road, the trees, the field, everything there, and were able to match it very accurately to a small yard, a small field inside the area that they detected before, and also show how the video actually shows a launch that that is in the exact direction in where the impact sites were later found. And the third thing, which corroborates everything, is analysis of another video, which this is something we helped with. Another video taken from 6 kilometers away, also very, very dark. So we enhanced it, did some nice computer vision tricks on it to show a lot of details, and could locate exactly where it was shot from. And you could see the exact launches you see in the original video. You can see them in this other remote video in the same location geographically, at the correct time, at the correct direction, going in the same trajectory as the impact sites. So that basically gives you, like, there's the, I mean, it's very hard to get confident in that. So basically, we can say with very, very high confidence that this jihadist group, they identifies Liwa al-Islam. Maybe they're not Liwa al-Islam, but they identifies Liwa al-Islam, which was the prominent group in the area at the time. They launched Syrian rockets in 2013. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when this is exposed. We will try to make some noise about it and push it to mainstream media. And it's going to be, I really don't have, I have no idea how they will respond, because in a sense, like basically all Western media, they all propagated the intelligence agencies' claims about the government being responsible. It was part of a general, more a wider campaign of showing the entire Syrian civil war as as a rebellion against an oppressive government, which is much more complex than this simplistic portrayal. So it would be very interesting to see if what would be stronger here, the motive to bring a big story and show all intelligence agencies were wrong, or the motive to remain on the safe side of we weren't wrong, we want to keep our good relations with our intelligence sources. I have no idea where this will go.
Oh, I'm willing to make a forecast on the way that's going to
Okay,
go.
let's go. What's your forecast?
Oh, that it's still most certainly not going to get picked up
Yeah, you think? Okay.
at least right away. I would think it would have to sort of bubble up
Okay.
to get any
Yeah, it
sort of
doesn't-
attention, because I don't think the media is going to be, oh, shoot, let's go quickly rush out and say that it was wrong. I don't think that'll be the way. I'll give that a 90% confidence. That at least in the
It
first
doesn't
week
help
they
that
won't.
the Assad regime is backed by Russia also. Like, there are very clear
Sure,
geopolitical
that's-
incentives here to keep the status quo and not change what the mainstream
Especially
story
right
is.
now,
So I
right?
think it's pretty
Yeah.
clear.
With
Makes sense.
increasing tensions too, yeah.
Yeah, on the other hand, it is an interesting story. It will, I mean, you can build it in a way that will bring some traffic and income.
Oh yeah, if you're the
So,
brave journalist that wants to run with it, I mean, you could get a lot of new watchers, you know, by covering the new.
You might want to go
evidence.
to like a newer outlet like an Axios that wasn't around during the chemical attacks, that don't have anything
do
to
you know
chance issuing
do you know which outlets always said it was the opposition? These are the the most extreme right wing, like ONN, how it's called, yeah. So they would always go. Tucker Carlson is also promoting this.
that it was
So
promoting which side? Sorry.
promoting that
The
this is
jihadist,
not a government operation. So
It's not
this
the best
is
messenger to get it out though. If for the larger.
yeah, you know, at this point, I'm I don't like anyone. So everyone is just that says nonsense at some point and says intelligent stuff at another point, and I hate everyone at the same level.
Do you think that there's a risk of, you know, if this story comes out and people run with it and they start to understand what might have really happened in Syria, that, you know, other past news reports of, you know, past, you know, civil sort of violence done by governments propagated by various intelligence agencies will be called into question? Because as you said, you know, the intelligence agencies sort of shared a very high level of confidence that it was the Assad regime that carried out these attacks. You know, to be proven wrong could definitely jeopardize, you know, and make people look back at some of the other stories and narratives that they've put out.
I don't know. I hope so. In general, my confidence in the ability of intelligence agencies to analyze information of deep strategic value that requires understanding, empathizing with the other side is very low. It's a problem of who are the people, what are the interests, what are the pressures they're under. A person that goes to work for an intelligence agency is probably not a person who has a lot of empathy to the enemy. So that's like you're building an organization that is built to fail. You're by definition taking only a certain kind of people who will fail to really understand how the other side thinks. So yeah, I think in general the public needs to realize how much they suck in that. And I don't know if this will
Are there any
change
intelligence?
anything.
Are there any intelligence agencies that are structured in a sort of better way, or do you like have ideas on how you would sort of improve intelligence analysis? I'm guessing it's sort of some way of deploying a sort of a methodical approach similar to Rootclaim when it comes to analyzing situations.
I don't think. I think it's very hard to build an intelligence agency that works. It's just. I mean, you can't open it because you need to deal with confidential information. And the people you will bring will always be the people who want to work for the government.
Yeah.
And they will always be promoted based on how much they help their superiors, which eventually their superiors are the government. So I don't think there's a way to build this. The only thing we need to do is basically stop trusting them when it comes to these issues. There are issues that they can do well, but when it comes to these kind of strategic issues that require understanding the other side, we need to realize they're just worthless. We need to build our own public crowd intelligence agencies.
Based on some like open
And
source
Clan, I
intelligence.
actually read a book recently called Geopolitical Alpha, and in the book, the author talks about how in intelligence agencies, oftentimes, one of their biggest problems is that they almost have too much information, and so they often include information that's non-diagnostic and isn't actually relevant to the outcome of the question that they're trying to solve, and they end up sort of skewing their ultimate result because they're just including too much, almost like the paradox of choice, sort of. Do you think that's also sort of part of the issue there?
Yeah, it is part of the issue. Another very similar issue is being very excited about confidential information. In these issues, there's hardly an advantage to having confidential information because it's much more important to be able to correctly analyze the information you have than to get twice as much information. So the problem is that they fall in love with their confidential sources. They have this piece of information that they only have, and it's very dear to them, and it's of course not open, so they don't get feedback on maybe how they're misinterpreting it, and it's very appealing to say, no, I'm right, you're wrong because I have this information that you don't have. It's a very easy way to shut down dialogue.
A conversation. Yeah.
And then sort of last thing before we get into our traditional rapid fire round when we have our guests on, even though you don't have a background in forecasting, you will have to make 2 predictions at the end of the podcast.
Oh, okay.
But before that, just one
Wasn't
quick
prepared for
question
that.
on the Syrian evidence, just for some clarification. Is your confidence with high certainty that this was done by an opposition group for the Ghouta attack in particular, or is this for the majority or all sort of reported sarin attacks during that time period?
Okay, so basically, once you solve Ghouta, and that is opposition, that basically closes all other Syrian attacks. Around 10 Syrian attacks that happened. It's very unlikely that those were by the government. There's by the way, there's something that you never heard in media, and that is there were several Syrian attacks where government soldiers were the main injured party. So that by itself would make it very, very weird, but of course you never heard about that. So so those would definitely be now.
And this is nothing,
government.
and there's no sort of statement on the chlorine attacks, right? That this evidence is.
Okay, so the question about the chlorine attacks is it's harder to say. We didn't do a deep analysis. My guess would be opposition as well.
All right, and
but that's not something I would bet $100,000 on.
And then we have some rapid fire questions for you, Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah, so that we have 2.
Just a disclaimer: when you ask me as a person, I'm using the same inference methods that everyone uses. I don't think I'm that good. I can only be proud of results that I give after going through the methodology. That's a long process, but let's play.
Yeah, I mean these are pretty low stakes,
Okay.
But we think they're fun. So the first question is, what do you think the likelihood is that Russia annexes more territory in Eastern Europe in the next 5 years?
"5 years, annex more territory."
Yeah, in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I'll give that 15.
I think off the top of my head, that's pretty in line with what we've heard from some of our, super forecasters that have come on the show. So that's a good prediction. I think a safe prediction. And then the second question is, what is the likelihood that you believe that we'll detect alien life in the next 10 years, either currently living, any life at all, or like cellular single cell organisms?
So we need electromagnetic signals is that qualifies, right? It doesn't have to be. You don't need to actually see the life. You can see they're communicating or something, right?
If you can sense it, I think that would count under the criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any evidence of extraterrestrial life, 10 years. I guess 10. 10 sounds good.
Yeah, I think it's about
10% for the currently living.
Sorry.
Like 10% for like currently living extraterrestrial life, or just past signs of extraterrestrial
Anything.
life.
Just
Yeah.
having definite evidence that somewhere there is or was the civilization.
And then what about
Within
the
10
likelihood for
within 10
currently
years?
living?
It's mostly because we're not looking. It's I mean,
Mhm.
it's not we're not investing that heavily in looking for it. So
Right.
I don't see. I mean, there has to be some freak occurrence within 10 years to for that to happen. I guess 10% is generous, but I just don't feel confident enough in my knowledge on the subject to give a lower number.
And then do you have any confidence on currently living life? So like perhaps cellular
Without
life on
detecting,
like
are
moon
there
and-
currently?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a tough one. I would say I would probably put it much lower than other people. A lot of the interesting research in that area is actually not on the side of the of studying aliens, but more about anthropic reasoning, simulation argument. Are you familiar with these areas?
Yeah.
I think these are more ways to make an estimate there. So is there currently a living civilization? Does it have to be our universe, or could it be other universes?
Yes, or it could be just like cellular life on Mars or Europa or something as well.
Okay. So, but do you need to take into account other universes, or is this only the universe accessible to us?
Well, then there would also have to be credible evidence in the multiverse theory as well in the next 10 years. So it's conditional
It doesn't
on
have to be
that.
multiverse. Just more
Or
than one universe
more-
existing.
Okay, yes.
But
Is
let's
it
keep it to our universe, because
Okay.
otherwise it gets
Just for
too
simplicity.
too weird.
Yeah.
In our universe, currently living alien life, 70.
I like that
Wait,
number. That gets
70?
me excited.
70% it exists. I assume most
Oh,
people go to 95, right, or something like that. No,
but what about in terms of detecting that in the next 10 years?
no, that I already answered. That's a 10.
Oh, okay. Oh, see, sorry, just for that other one, we also meant like historically, like could have been dead and non-existent.
Yeah.
Like,
So for us in the next 10 years, detecting any sign of non terrestrial life, that's a 10%.
alrighty.
For anything existing now, oh, you were
Yeah.
asking about detecting now?
Yeah.
I was trying to answer whether they exist at all.
Yeah. No,
Okay. So you want us to so yeah, so you're asking whether it's going to be, yeah, so I think most of the ones we'll find. Okay, again, you have a question. What do you define now? What kind of now is not well defined when you talk about these kind of
Space and time.
yeah. So are you talking about, so if we see a communication happening now, they could be a billion years dead already. So
Right.
so which one? Where would that qualify?
it would have
I
to be
guess-
that it's currently at observation alive. So if it was many light years away, you'd have to do some sort of Bayesian inference, perhaps. And as long as there's a 85% confidence it's still alive, it'll.
Okay. So we need to think. So yeah. So we need to think that, say that the ones that I find are still alive. So okay, probably half. So 5% would be that the signal we found is indicative of a currently living alien life signal, or actual evidence, or a visitation even.
Like the
Let
visitation
me ask you.
option.
Let me ask you a different question. What do you think of the probability that we're currently being monitored by
For alien life
life?
form.
Yeah.
So you gave a 70% chance alien life exists at all. Being observed.
Right. Intelligent enough then to have civilization, technology, to
And
travel
be interested
planets
in
far
coming
away.
here.
I just know that
monitoring
we're like
us.
our
Exactly.
our galaxy is relatively early in terms of the overall lifespan of the universe, so then we're likely one of the first, so we would probably be generally more likely towards the front of the pack. So if you're saying 10% will find any life, 5% currently living, then I'd maybe give in the next 10 years, just off the top of my head,
No, my
2.5%.
question is it's not a prediction. This is a
Oh.
general credence question. What is the probability you think that we're currently being monitored? There's no evidence for that. They're very good at hiding. But what's the probability you think that currently there is at least one alien civilization that knows what's going on here?
I'm inclined to say, moderate. Like
It's moderate. We're all in the probability and percentage.
50?
like in
What
percentage
moderate?
terms. I'd say more than 50%. I think
What-
than moderate to high. I'd say maybe closer to 55-60%. So not too much higher, but still, I think it's more likely than not a little bit. What about you, Clay? I feel like you're gonna come in a lot more conservative.
Yeah, just because, right, if we're saying 70% there's intelligent or there's just life at all in the universe, which is what Sarah just given that, then just thinking where we are positionally in the universe, I would definitely say I'm on the lower side of 50. Let's say napkin percentages, I think 15 is where I'm kind of feeling like it's like the same likelihood of Trump winning in 2016, kind of as my mental heuristic.
Interesting
Definitely
analog.
possible, but at least as of right now, I think we are more likely to be the observers than the observee. Sar, what
Yeah,
about
So
you?
I'm at
come back to
30% for that.
Okay.
You're at 30.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see like how much different is the estimate for us being monitored covertly compared to people believing in alien visitations. I assume if I ask you that if there was ever any evidence for alien involvement here, you'd probably give a much lower number.
What?
But it's
There's tons of documented evidence on InfoWars.
no, it's interesting to see the difference because I can definitely see a situation where we are currently being monitored at even from very close and very detailed, even though I don't see any evidence for that. So it's
Okay,
a
wait.
very interesting game between priors and evidence.
Last
Definitely.
alien one. What are the odds that we are currently observing alien life already?
So like
And it's not.
it's being
Yeah.
kept secret from us.
Yeah. That I feel pretty low. Because that would have
You
leaked,
feel
I
pretty
would
low.
feel. Yeah.
So no one actually, no whistleblowers. Yeah, it's
Or
probably
or a few that they portrayed as
one and a half
crazy.
percent, I guess. 1%. Yeah.
Pretty low.
Yeah, I was thinking
I
one and a
think that
half.
makes
Just
sense.
divide my other observation by 10. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Sar, anything else that where can people find you? What do you want people to check out? Any other sort of final closing messages to the watchers of our podcast? Thank you so much, for all of your time and for your wonderful answers, and for the great
Yeah, if any of
back
your
and
other
forth we had.
if any of
So-
your other companies also have updates, obviously, as we mentioned, you are chairing / seeding close to 10 discrete companies right now. If any of them have exciting updates that you want the viewers to keep an eye out for, also please feel free to share.
Sure. So the last question. So I guess best way to follow me is Saar Wilf on Twitter, Rootclaim, also Rootclaim on Twitter, website rootclaim.com. What else did you ask?
Does any of the other companies have anything exciting coming up?
No, nothing that. Bzigo is always a fun company to look at. Bzigo. So
Yeah, that's the one
they're
where you can
doing a
detect
mosquito
mosquitoes
detector.
in a
Yeah.
room. Can you quickly explain that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a computer vision device. You place it in your room. It has an infrared lighting that you obviously can see, and it monitors the room and detects movement of small objects. And when one of them looks like a mosquito, it will give you a smartphone notification and will mark the mosquito on the wall with a laser marker. And the next version will also eliminate it autonomously.
I was
So.
about to ask, when does the
Eliminate
lasers
it?
come in to just zap them? Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, it's important to understand that most of the problem with mosquitoes is detecting them. Their evolutionary strategies is to be hidden. When you actually see them and they don't go away, it's pretty easy to kill. But they're very good at evading human or any vision. So detection is most of the problem. I think it's detecting alone is a great product. But eliminating is of course much more fun and can work when you're not in the room. The big challenge with eliminating is safety. You can't use high power lasers. Definitely not autonomously
Right.
in a room. If
Yeah, there's
In
problems
case
waiting to
someone walks
happen,
through like
lawsuits
the
waiting to
beam as
happen.
well. But wait,
yeah,
how
so
does it
yeah.
detect? How mosquitoes are small, like
Yeah.
quite small, and like how large is like the sensor on like this camera to be able to is it this like a really expensive system to be because how can
No,
it
so it's the trick here is that the mosquito is just a few pixels. We don't detect shape. We detect movement patterns. Okay, so that's what allows us to differentiate it from dust or sensor noise. So
what's the accuracy
yeah.
rate of it?
So basically, you don't get any false alarms if you get notification that's mosquito, or it could be another flying insect of a similar size. That also could be, but you don't just get random notifications. And the main issue about coverage is that we don't see the whole room. So it's a wide angle camera, and it sees the ceiling, the top half of the walls. But if the mosquito is not there, we will not see it. If the mosquito is there, 80-90% of the times you will detect it. And if you don't detect it the first time, then he will within 10 minutes he will move to another place, and then we'll detect it. So it's pretty accurate. So it's a good product.
Was this also driven by your, similar to the work that you've been doing with COVID, driven by your interest in sort of helping to solve these big public health issues? Obviously, mosquitoes are, very well known for spreading malaria and Zika and other like diseases. Is that part of the impetus there, or is this more of your interest in sort of optic technology and AI and stuff like that?
Yeah, so first of all, Bzigo is a few years running, so it's before the pandemic, and it of course started from me realizing that mosquitoes are annoying me too much, and the main problem is that I don't know where they are. The rest is pretty easy. The problem is I don't know where they are when they wake me up at night. So yeah, and that of course connected with my background in computer vision and AI, and thinking that maybe you don't need something that sophisticated. So there are a lot of projects over the years trying to build like very heavy, complex, expensive systems, but the idea here is that maybe it doesn't have to be that complicated. If you use a camera and only try to detect motion, you don't need to detect the shape. And of course, if you don't eliminate it, that's also makes it much more simple. So eventually, yeah, we found a way to make it consumer price.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Saar, this was absolutely wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for giving us your time plus a little bit extra. I know we went over, so and it's quite late over there in Israel right now, so we appreciate
right.
you staying up this late to record with us.
Sure, it was lots of fun. I enjoyed
And we
it.
appreciate seeing your dog as well, of course.
Of course.
He's quiet now. That's good.
All right. That was episode 6 of the Global Guessing Weekly podcast. You guys can find Saar Wilf at Saar Wilf on Twitter and at Rootclaim. And his website that we've been talking about, Rootclaim, can be found at rootclaim.com. Andrew, any final words?
No, I think that was a lot of fun. One of my favorite podcasts so far. And hope to keep in touch, sir.
All right.
Awesome. Okay. Good luck.
And that's a wrap. Thanks, everyone.